Hello everyone, my name is Brittany, welcome to my channel. Today I have a brand new episode in the playthrough that I'm doing here in Planet Zoo, which is called Grassland Grove and focuses on all of the grassland animals, of which there are many, so this will probably go on for a long time. I know in my last episode that I said this was going to be a two-parter section where I build 4 new habitats for 4 animals. Upon editing the extensive amounts of content that I have for this build section, it's probably actually going to be more like 3 or 4 episodes. So strap in, get comfy, and let's continue building the oh dear section of this zoo. And yes, I still love the name. Where I left off in the last part was that I just finished building this massive curved wall that extended from the pronghorn antelope enclosure all the way to this next enclosure, which is going to be the red deer habitat. Red deer like to have a maximum of 9 members of their herd, which means that this habitat didn't have to be the largest of the deer ones that I was going to have to build. It's really only a little bit larger than the pronghorn antelope enclosure. So at this point, I've built out this little pond area right next to the curved wall, as well as added an extra layer of wall pieces on top of the curved wall, just so that it blended a little bit more seamlessly pronghorn antelope guest viewing area. And I felt like the breeze block wall was looking a little bit boring on the exterior, so I found these leaf wall decals and I added them all over the wall. For realism, I found this little wheelbarrow and bags of, I don't know, straw or animal feed, and I included that in, and I actually really like the idea of adding in some more realistic pieces into the habitats. So I think at some point I'm going to go back through the zoo and add in those little elements as part of a zoo improvements video. I included some lights along the walls, more because they look nice rather than we're actually going to be using them, because this is a day only zoo. And then I built out this little shelter part over the keeper entrance. Looking at it now, I do think that it looks a little bit out of place and I don't change it. So I do think that I will go in at some point and extend it so that it goes all the way down, which I think will make a little bit more sense. I then extended the pond out because it looked a little bit funny finishing where it did, and included some rocks and big tree branches or logs to decorate the edges of it and just blend it more into the environment. I did go through and move the little wheelbarrow so that it sits underneath the overhang next to the zookeeper's entrance, just because that to me would be the most realistic place for the zookeepers to keep it. And then similarly to the pronghorn antelope habitat, I wanted to hide the terrain edges where the path sits, and also wanted to hide any potential viewing points where I didn't want guests to view the animals. So I went in with the rocks again to hide the lumps and bumps and to give it a nicer finish. Now this is when I start actually building the guest viewing gallery for the habitat, and this is one of my favorite builds that I've done in the zoo so far. Honestly, second only to Savannah Dome. It's a massive guest viewing gallery for the rest of the habitats that I'm going to be building. So 3 guest viewing areas in one. That being said, I had absolutely no idea how I was going to go about building it. I didn't know how big I wanted it to be. I also had no idea how I wanted this habitat to connect to the terrain above it, because as you can see, they're on 2 different levels. So it really was a kind of trust the process build for me. I did know that I wanted the guest viewing area to kind of wrap around the habitat and be these massive glass panes. So that was pretty easy to build out. And then I used the same light oak wall pieces that I used for the curved wall to build out this L-shaped viewing gallery in a size that was large and could accommodate the guest educator talking points with a seating bank area, but not too large that it was just going to be this massive cavernous gallery. I made one of the glass panels shorter than the other because this is where I'm going to be placing the guest educator point, and I wanted them to be able to throw food over the barrier. As you can see, I had a little bit of difficulty with the pathing, not wanting to place down in one specific spot, so I built the pathing everywhere else, and then I just shortened the length of the wall by 1. And because I had so much issue with the pathing at that point, I made the decision that I definitely didn't want that to happen again, and so I drafted out where I wanted the pathing to be and how I wanted it to connect to the other habitats in the surrounding area. Using the wall pieces along the edge of the pathing as well was really helpful because I could see how the building was starting to take shape and also how the archways looked. I really like that I included these archways because while it's one massive building, the archways really help at breaking up the space and clearly defining the different zones for each animal. Based on how they sat in the environment and actually against the wall of the terrain above it, it gave me, I think, a really good idea about how to connect the two levels, which is through a waterfall. I mean, I think that it makes a lot of sense and explains why there's this pond area. And so this is the next part of the build, me trying to connect the two levels through this waterfall that I'm building out. I started off by building this big rock wall that's basically flat on one side and then duplicated the same idea with the rock wall one tier down. I figured that it would make sense if this was the deepest part in the pond, so I did some terraforming to adjust the depth and then added in some water special effects. I added them to each tier and then also on top of the middle tier to kind of replicate water, even though I can't actually add water. And then I just played around with the terrain on the level above to create, I don't know, a stream or a river that extended all the way to the waterfall. I did have to make some extra adjustments to the terrain so that the water was at a good level to kind of overflow and turn into a waterfall. And then once I had that, I added on some additional water special effects on top of the waterfall to make it look like the water was flowing from the top level across that rock face to the mid level, across that, and then down into the pond in the habitat below. I'm still not exactly sure how I'm going to do the water on the top level, like where did it come from? Perhaps the level above, or maybe I'll have to make a massive water feature at the end of it as though the rain falls into this massive pond which then overflows into a waterfall down below. I don't know, that's a problem for another time. Moving back into the guest viewing area, I switched the wood barricade back to a glass one instead, just so that guests have a full view the entire time, and added in some dark wooden columns for some additional detail along the edges of the barricade as well as the arches that I've built throughout the building. I made the arches their own group so that they're much easier to duplicate throughout the rest of the building. Sometimes I do go back in and re-add them to the group so that it's all one building, but it's just kind of a hack to make it easier if you're duplicating the same feature multiple times. I also used the dark columns to hide any gaps between the barrier and the path. You can only get the path so close to the barrier and there's always just a little bit of a gap. I added the wood along the top of the glass as well because it's kind of a hazard to just have a glass edge with nothing on top of it. And then I go ahead and add in the guest educator point as well as the seating bank. I wasn't sure whether I was going to add 2 or 1 here, but I figured 1 would be enough for this particular species. 2 felt a little bit too cramped in the space. I also widened the main entrance to this building area. I think it's going to be quite a high traffic zone for guests, so it would make sense to have the path be as wide as it can. And I also decided that this was where I wanted to have another food court area, so the path needed to be wider to accommodate that as well. I also wanted to have some guest bathrooms within the vicinity of this building, so I tucked them in this little corner away from the food and where the guests are going to go and eat. I added in 4 stores, 2 food and 2 beverage. For the drinks, I think I went for Pip Shot juice and Pip Shot smoothies. I don't think I've really used those in this zoo so far. And then the food was, I think, Maxilente and the bakery one, Gertie Bakes or something like that. I'd really like them to add in some more options just for variety. I feel like I use the same ones over and over and over again because just there's not enough variety. I used the same wooden wall pieces on the stalls as I used for the rest of the building because this is essentially going to be one giant building area, and started building out what I wanted the roof to look like. I do move it out of the way when I'm building the inside. And then I built out where the food court was going to go. I had a little bit of difficulty with the pathing for this one, and I wanted the guests to be able to view the animals from the food court area. So initially I built out a big glass barrier, but I decided that I would go with windows instead and added in my favorite dark wooden columns along the edges of each of the windows to finish them off. I finished off building what I wanted the roof to look like. It's angled on either side with a flat top, and then of course I added in my very favorite skylights to ensure sure that it wasn't too dark inside. It took a little bit of fiddling around to get the roof to sit exactly where I wanted it to. I built it as a separate piece to the rest of the building so that I could easily remove it whenever I needed to. I included roof trim to either of the edges of the roof so that it didn't just stop randomly exactly where the wall is and there's some kind of overhang. I added the rest of the walls to the building so that it met up to where I'd placed the roof. Once the shape of the building had fully come together, it was really easy to notice where I needed to add some extra pieces. So I deleted a couple more of the roof tiles to create another skylight along the sloped section, and then changed out some of the wall pieces so that they were glass as well. For the food court area, I wanted to have 4 benches for guests to sit at, so I laid those ones out first and then planned everything else around them. I added in 2 bins on either side of the entrances to the food court, and then was trying to figure out a way to connect the food court building with the main guest viewing building. While I was trying to figure that out, I added in some more decorative details. So you saw that I added in the dark wooden columns on all of the corners of the building that kind of had that raw light oak edge. And then I also framed out the windows of the 4 food and drink shops, just like the windows and archways. I built out one and then just duplicated it across the other windows. I added in some signs along the top of the shop front window and also in between each of the shops, just to kind of signify where the line should go. And then I built out the box that the Habitat Education board is going to sit on top of. I already used the rocks and the plasterboard a lot in the same way in the other habitats, so I wanted to do something a little bit different for this one. So I built them out of the flat wooden planks. They were a little bit taller than anticipated, so I just kind of shoved them into the ground a little bit and hid them that way. I didn't want to overdo it with the boards because they took up a lot of space of the area, and this is really supposed to be a food court, so I included more of these boards in the main building, and I just did 2 on either side in the food court area. Because of how the path wanted to place in the food court, I ended up with a couple of random gaps, but I used these to my advantage as kind of a barricade between where the line is going to be for the shops and where the seating area will be. I went with the blend of light walls as the main wall area and then dark columns on top just as an accent so that it blends in with the surrounding building. I decided that there still wasn't enough glass and variation to the building, so I duplicated what I did for the main wall across the other 2 walls as well. The walls underneath the window felt a little bit bland just because they were empty, which I fixed by adding these giant screens on either side and using them as education boards instead. I added the roof back on at this point because I was done with building out the interior. That's really all I wanted to do with the food court, and finished off the details on the skylight. The final thing that I'm going to do in this part is add in some little details to the front entrance to this building. I hid the standard pathing by using those same wooden columns, which I think helps these areas blend in really nicely to the surrounding building. And then of course added in a big tree and a few rocks for landscaping on one side, and then the other I kept it simple with a hedge and some wild grass and more rocks. That is everything that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this series, please feel free to like and subscribe, and leave a comment below letting me know what animal you would like to see next. Bye!